and welcome to Masking for It, the podcast with a purpose, combining clinical insight with lived experience. Join us as we explore the realities of high-masking neurodivergent adults, debunk myths around autism and ADHD, and challenge outdated and harmful systems as we discuss the ways we can help neurodivergent people not just survive, but thrive. We're here so that the hidden can feel seen, the confused can find clarity, and the future can be different, because it needs to be. You can help us massively by following or subscribing, and in return, we can continue to bring you along behind the scenes with expert guests, pioneering research, and the chance to say you were a part of the change that we're creating. So, let's do this.
Hello and welcome to Masking for It today. What we are going to be discussing is that journey after diagnosis, because I think for me, that was certainly one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to create Masking for It. And collectively, we all want to help people on that journey after the big news, because that's often the part where people can feel most alone. And from my personal experience, it was very confusing and it took me a lot of time. And I wanted Leslie and Gail to be able to speak today about how they support people, what they find helps people afterwards, and some of the thoughts and feelings that I went through. So, you're not alone if that's something you're going through. We've really wanted to create a resource that's here for people to catch them after that, because services aren't always, and sometimes you won't have had formal diagnosis either. It might just be something that you've had as a realization. So, I think one of our biggest motivations for being here has been this. And even if you're a friend or family of somebody who's been diagnosed, hopefully this might help you to understand what they've been going through, because it's a massive process. I didn't know I was going to be diagnosed with this, but Leslie, you were saying earlier, even when people have sought this diagnosis and have, finally got their assessment after knowing even for a long time, that actually there's still a lot for them to get to grips with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people liken it to the grief process, in that there's a sudden piece of news, there's a sudden shift in who you are. People might refer to it as a loss of their old self and the beginning of a new self, and that process of change, and through that kind of process, from sometimes people talk about being numb and really stunned, and then some people feel angry, people feel upset. And then sometimes after a period of weeks, months, years even, people start to become more able to look to the future and think about, well, what does this mean for me? And those different stages of grief, they don't always necessarily come in order. So some people might go away feeling really positive for ages and want to make loads of changes, and then have a bit of a period of, oh, actually, this is massive. And that might come later. So there's no right way or wrong way to go through the process. But I think people do experience it a lot, to that grief process, where there's a series of stages that come and go, and it feels really, really powerful emotionally. And people can feel really alone, can't they?
Yeah, I'd say there was definite loneliness for me, in that it was something I guess I felt sprung on me. It's not somewhere I had ever put myself in the world. And it was the most magical day in the world, in that I had some answers, there was some explanation, there was some understanding. And just to hear you two say, yeah, other people exist that feel like this. There are other people who have been treated like you and feel like you, and that then made me feel less alone. But when you haven't known that those people are your people, or that they exist, and you're thinking of your own circle that you've built for yourself in your own life, you suddenly feel quite a panic of, how do I share that with people? Can I share that with people? What am I sharing with people? I think the biggest thing was, okay, you've told me I have autism. I think of autism as something entirely different to who I am, what I am. So I think there's practical stages of what you have to go through, as in educating yourself, understanding, building that understanding, and then planning for the future. And then there's also the sort of stage of emotionally processing it, and that grief that you speak of. It's absolutely, that's the weirdest feeling, I think. You do get a sort of like show reel of your life, and it's almost as though it's been a Laurel and Hardy black and white mime show previously, and you didn't know there was no sound. It was just you were going through it and it was what it was. And then suddenly everything's in color and got sound, or it's got subtitles going on and they're explaining why you're feeling that in that moment, what happened there, what was missed there, or that you were actually right there, you were okay, and it was a misunderstanding or mistreatment there. So you're going through sort of your whole life with a totally different lens, and some of that feels good, some of that makes you feel acknowledged, seen, validated, and some of that just feels so damn unfair and painful. And I think as much as you look to the past, there's also so much about the future that hits you. And I think the thing that hit me hardest immediately was, oh my God, this is me. I think seeking I'd been seeking there to be an answer where it was like, so we can do this therapy and then you don't have to be you anymore. You'll suddenly know how to do this, that, and the other and function like everyone else. Or there'll be some medication that stops you being useless. You're seeking an answer. You have an answer so far as you have an explanation, but you also are being told this is you. And I think I felt really helpless, really angry, really upset that I was still me, and that was part of the answer. But honestly, all I'd say, as much as the other things we're going to talk about today, I wanted today to be very constructive. I didn't want to go too deeply and speak about me too much. But I think, I hope that this gives people comfort in hearing, going through the motions, whatever. If you go through 5 different emotions a day, you love it, you hate it, you love it, you hate it. That's totally normal because there's a lot to process. But I think, alongside the constructive help we want to give today, I definitely want people to know that there's going to be a lot of loss along the way, but with time, it's absolutely something that you can and will start feeling more comfortable with, and will feel much more positive than negative. You're still going to feel frustrated potentially that, you can't just have more energy and not have your brain drained from all the processing you're doing and everything you're taking in, and that things aren't necessarily going to be easy socially. But in time, it becomes more important. And this is really important, that it does become important for you to be true to yourself. Because I think many late diagnosed people, we end up in such a state sometimes because we're trying to fight our nature, to do what's neurotypically expected. And I think you start winning the battle with this when you give yourself time and grace to stop doing that. So yeah, a lot of processing to do and a lot of work to do. But I think I really hope that people find it hopeful to know that it's worth the work. There's nothing in this world that's more worth it finally, which is hard for us to do when we've been made to feel like we don't matter or our feelings don't matter. A lot of this goes against what we get used to feeling or how we get used to existing. But it's the most important work that you'll ever do. It really, really matters.
I think one of the things that's important is it's a transition, isn't it? It just occurred to me while you were talking then that transition into the realization that actually this is who I am. It's probably the biggest transition of your life. And one of the things that we talk about in autism diagnosis, do you find that transition's hard? Transition out of the car into school, or the transition from coming off your game to going to bed, or the transition in and out of a different lesson for children, or the transition to university, or different transitions in life. But actually, this is a huge one. And I think that there's the emotional element of the loss, or the shift in you, your identity, who you are. But actually, it's also a transition, which feels blooming hard anyway, but it's the biggest one you'll ever have.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe there's a misconception that having the diagnosis is the answer and the end of the process. Kind of, we've talked previously, haven't we, about the delays of getting to the point of having an assessment and getting that answer. But it isn't the end, is it? It's the start, actually, that it's the start of that transition. It's the point in knowing what direction your life might be going in, or having some clear answers about what's gone on before. But it that label is not the end, is it? It's the start. And hopefully, I guess we always have the intention when we're doing assessments with people that part of the process of that assessment is helping people to understand themselves. We give people really detailed reports that kind of explain why we've come to the conclusion that we've come to, and also make recommendations of things that might be helpful for people to follow up on, so that we kind of, people can go away with some guidance of where to go next. But I definitely know of people that haven't been able to look at that report for a long time because they're still processing kind of what's happened and that kind of diagnosis, and aren't ready to look at how they've been seen by other people at that point, but do get there at some point later down the line. But everybody kind of encounters that differently and does it in different ways, and kind of that process of understanding takes different amount of time for different people, don't they, depending on where they've come from and what's going on in their life at the time. You know, we often encounter people at points of transition in their life where things have suddenly got much more difficult than they have been previously. So often all of the stuff that's led them to seek out a diagnosis kind of takes over. And that actually kind of processing that diagnosis has to come after, because of all the practical things that perhaps are going on and that need addressing more urgently, from a practical point of view.
Yeah, it really is just the start. Do you think that's the best way to see it, actually? I think anybody who's been building to it and thinks, you know, they'll finally skip off into the sunset, there's an element of you can and you will. But I think the best thing you can do with it, I was reflecting today, is absolutely use it as a moment in time for it to be a catalyst for self-care, but not in that way that we usually all flinch at, or I certainly do. But self-care is in you've finally been given the right manual, and it's the time to say, okay, I am going to start working out what works for me. And that can be in a physical capacity, an emotional capacity, a social capacity, or a professional capacity. And it is absolutely your time to feel empowered and validated to put in some boundaries, to think about what your boundaries might be, to think about what some triggers are for overwhelm or being depleted of your energy. It's a really important time, especially with that report. Actually, I'd forgotten about the report, but that is probably one of the most special things you'll ever have, in that it's kind of a little manual of you. It's the closest thing you'll get to that, perhaps. And it's time to stop trying to people please and trying to exist in the way that gets you the least flack and is the path of least resistance, because we always end up paying for that anyway. So I think it's absolutely the time to go, okay, am I more sensory seeking or actually not? Or what emotionally do I need? Do I need to have conversations with people? Do I need to have some sort of plan for what my support network's going to be that I'm going to give to myself? A million things you can unpack and think about. And I think talking and therapy was certainly one of the most important things that got me through. But I think more than anything, it's letting it be that time for you, that you put the stake in the ground and you say, okay, I'm going to do the work and I'm going to make it work for me.
I was just thinking about the analogy that I quite often talk to people about is the analogy of having a jigsaw almost. Like, that's kind of, it's not set in stone what you need to do. And a jigsaw is lots of different things that fit together in a particular way that might be helpful for a while, but then you might change some of the pieces out and put some different things in as you go along the journey, or as you age or your life changes. And I think one of the central pieces of the jigsaw has to be linked with self-compassion is that understanding that you have probably felt really ashamed about the way that you've managed or not managed, or the way people have seen you or judged you throughout your life, whether it's in school or in jobs or society, people looking at you and judging you for the way that you are. And I think one of the central things has to be the ability to use that information you've got and to kind of reflect on your life, whether that's with a friend, family member, a therapist. It doesn't have to be therapy. It can be a self-reflection exercise that is kind of, it's almost like you rewind the tape back and revisit lots of things through a new lens and think about, actually, yeah, I was ashamed of that. That was just mortifying, or that happened, or that particular teacher hated me. And then you can rewind it and look back and go, well, actually, that was probably because of this, or that's the way I thought about it, or misunderstand it. And I think, from an ADHD perspective, I can look back at loads of times in life where I've been told off in school, or things happen, or I've been on school trips, nearly fell off the ferry to Germany, nearly didn't actually make it to Germany because I was messing about. And I think, like, looking back now, my teacher was absolutely livid with me and dragged me along Zeebrugge Harbour by the ear for going missing on the ferry. But now I look back, I think, well, yeah, of course I did that on that trip, because I was really overstimulated. And there's lots of things I've done looking back in my life, I just think that was just a really stupid thing to do. But it's not stupid, it's just the way my brain was working. So that if you can learn to give yourself some compassion in the context of shame, and shame is such a powerful emotion. I think it's absolutely pervasive emotion. We all experience shame, but I think people who are neurodivergent particularly experience shame because they're always commented on, the behaviours commented on, especially as a child. And I think that's why it's important to look at school experiences and childhood experiences in mental well-being of adults, even though we're very much focusing on adult well-being, is because your formative experiences are so key, and you questioned and considered as naughty or a nuisance or whatever it is, the narrative that's been built around you, and then you can revisit it with a new lens and try and kind of move away from some of that shame and think about that self-compassion. And I think one of the things that people often come to us with shame about is that they've been really crap at therapy, in their words. Therapy's not worked for them, therefore I must be really bad at therapy. And I think now anyone who knows me well will know that I harp on a lot about cognitive behaviour therapy, CBT, which is the kind of therapy that most people will get offered, whether it's through the NHS or whether they're going to see a private therapist. It's often a CBT therapist. That's kind of the most accessible. And the idea with CBT is that you look at your thoughts and your behaviour and you try and understand it in a neurotypical way and think about, well, how does it make you feel? So, if it's a spider phobia, you can say, well, yeah, there's a spider there. My thoughts about the spider are that they're really dangerous, or they're really disgusting, or they're going to hurt me, or make me feel really uncomfortable. My feelings about it are anxiety. So, you can think about, well, that doesn't really make sense. So I start to challenge those beliefs about the spider. They're not, they're not real. Therefore, I've got to learn to think about it in a different way, or learn to see it in a different way. Whereas if you're a neurodivergent person and your phobia, in inverted commas, might have been, actually, I can't deal with a shopping centre because of my sensory overload, or certain experiences in life that have been so unbelievably painful that they become a thing that you then can't do. No amount of getting over it will help you, but actually understanding that your neurodivergent brain cannot tolerate that leads you to a more compassion-based way of therapy, of thinking about, actually, that is okay to feel like that. So what can I do next time? I can say to the person that invites me, yeah, I'd like to do that. Could we go later, or could we go on a certain day? Or, an idea that you could say, no, thank you, I don't do that because I'm a neurodivergent person. Therefore, I have to do it this way. That's self-advocacy and self-compassion. That's not about saying, well, you just got to get used to the shopping centre, because really nothing bad's going to happen. Because for many neurodivergent people, something bad did happen. And it might just be that the sensory aspect of it is what happens, but it's unpleasant and unbearable, and you don't have to get used to it. So I think the shame often comes as a result of having found so many things so difficult. So the idea of people say, well, should I get therapy now? Some people isn't the right thing to do. Some people it's about being within the family or the friends or people they trust. And I think you had a really good analogy, didn't you, Alexandra, about trust and thinking about who's in your circle that you can lean on.
Yeah, because trust for me, which now makes sense, I've got a little bit wrong. Now I have my diagnosis, but trust for me instinctively has always worked on how close do I feel to a person, and how much do I care about them, and how safe do I see them as opposed to, are they trustworthy? And it's a very different thing. And so actually gauging who you can and can't trust. I heard a brilliant analogy from Brene Brown, whose work generally is fantastic. And she came up with the jar of marbles. And essentially, if you can think about people in your life, and every time they've sort of demonstrated to you that they're trustworthy, if you pop a marble in an imaginary jar for each person, and the amount of times they've proved that they're there for you and they haven't broken your trust, then you can see whose jars are more full than other people's. And you start to be able to visualize and see who the trustworthy people in your life are. And, equally, when they've betrayed your trust, then you would remove a marble from their jar. And I think that helps to remove it from that security that you're easily lulled into just emotionally and naively. Sometimes, I have to admit that's often how I function. I'm very trusting in that if you're close to me, it's just instant and I care and expect it back because that's what I do for you. And I think there are a lot of autistic people that feel like that. And I think that's why we're quite often led astray or taken advantage of sometimes. And it's not because we don't pick up on things, it's just that our sort of our point system's different. what matters to us and counts to us is very different, and we're maybe not as suspicious as we should be because I think we show up very genuinely a lot of the time, so we expect that everyone else is. We don't think about it always. And so I think, especially with something this personal and important, I think another thing I certainly find hard, and I think is quite an autistic thing, is we're very honest. So for me, what was really difficult to weigh up post-diagnosis was, okay, I've been told I'm autistic. Do I have to tell people? Surely I have to tell people because I can't keep something that big to myself, and I feel like I'm being inauthentic or lying if I don't share that with my friends. And it's a really stressful situation because you just feel so uncomfortable whilst you're not sharing it. And my anxiety went up so much. But it's more important that you learn that it's yours to own, and you have to own that diagnosis. No one else has any right to know that about you. It's sort of on a need to know basis. And in Dr. Devon Price's book, Unmasking Autism, there were a few questions which I wish I'd found at the time of my diagnosis, but I'd like to share now because I think they're really helpful to help you weigh up, as well as thinking about your marble jars. They're really helpful questions that you need to ask yourself and help you stop feeling like you're doing something wrong by not saying, because I think they help explain a bit how and why you don't need to share everything. So number one, who do I want to come out as autistic to? Number two, why do I want to come out? What do I hope will happen? Number three, what do I wish people understood better about me? Number four, how much energy am I willing to put into educating this person about what autism really is? Number five, do I have a specific ask that I'd like to make, such as a request for an accommodation or different treatment? And number six, who gets me and can help advocate for me? And I think that helps give some context to why there might be times it's good to share it. But that also, you don't have to share it when there's no reason to. It's got to be about, does it help you feel more comfortable? Is it likely to make you feel closer to that person because they'll get to understand you better? So I think whilst you might feel compelled straight away to get it off your chest because it just feels so uncomfortable not to, you know, and I guess there's that shame thing there as well that weighed on me after my diagnosis and was hard because equally I thought, well, if I tell people, I don't fully understand what it is yet. All I did know was I felt uncomfortable with that diagnosis to start with, and I needed to give myself time before I was sharing that with other people because they're going to react. Oftentimes, it's really positive. Sometimes they might be just as confused as you, and you don't need their confusion on top of yours. So I think it's giving yourself again grace and time to come to terms with stuff before you're deciding whether to share that or not. And certainly there are other things to take into account, such as whether you want to share with your job. Now, you know, you may or may not want to. And again, you don't have to. There's no obligation if you're thinking about anything in any other legal terms. But, you know, if actually it would really help for you to be able to get some accommodations at work, which you're fully entitled to under the Equality Act 2010, go ahead. But I would just say take some time, even maybe book some time after you've had your diagnosis to process. Don't have a full busy schedule because your head's going to be spinning, and you just need to work all of these things out before you owe it to anybody else. You don't.
Alexandra, I wonder, because I think a lot of people think of it as a binary thing, don't they? Of like, I either disclose to everybody or I don't disclose at all. And I think from what, like the conversations we've had in the past and what you said today, it's much more subtle than that, isn't it? It's more nuanced. It's very dependent on the context, how safe you feel, your relationship with that person, what does it achieve by, those questions are really helpful. But I wondered whether you've had experiences of where that's been really positive, and what those responses were like that were positive and helpful when you have disclosed to someone. Because I think, I suppose we kind of pay attention to the ones where it's been really difficult and perhaps has resulted in the breakdown of a relationship, or, has felt really threatening. But I wondered, I know I've witnessed things in my own personal life where people have shared that they think they might be autistic or neurodivergent, and seeing other friends then respond in a really positive and kind of affirming way, and just like, well, and actually, like, it's not a big deal. What can we do to help? But it's not changed anything about that relationship. It's just been taken as part of that friendship, I suppose. But yeah, so I don't know. That was my question really, about what helpful responses have you had?
So one of the nicest reactions was my best friend, who actually was talking about someone else in her life was debating whether they may or may not be neurodivergent. And I just thought in my head, okay, it's time. And I just got back to her and I said, well, actually, something's happened in my life, and I've been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And she was like, oh my God, that's fantastic, and, you're still you. And I think that was a massive step for me in my own acceptance of it, because I really struggled to accept it for a while. It helped me with my acceptance to have told one of the people I love the most in the world, and for her to say back to me, but you're still you. It doesn't change that. It just helps you know what you need and explains things for you. You're still you, and I love you, and none of that changes. And that was amazing. That was one of the most special reactions. Another of my friends, it was, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I was quite insulted with that one to start with. But she also is absolutely phenomenal, and has her own child who's neurodivergent, and I understand and get on with like a house on fire. So it does make sense. And then I suppose trying to think more broadly, when it's helped, I think sometimes in situations it helps me to have said it, or that they know it, because then it makes me accountable to myself, if that makes sense. It makes me go, no, you've got permission here to meet your needs, and say if you're not okay, or say if you need something, because I think otherwise it's really hard to give yourself permission of that. I still find that really difficult after however many years of just trying to do everything as I'm supposed to rather than how I need to. But I think if I know I'm in an environment where people understand or know that about me, it makes me stand up for myself more, if that makes sense. It makes me be truer to myself and look after myself better, because I've got no reason not to. I'm not trying to pretend. So yeah, it's definitely, it's hard to get used to because it still feels really scary to say for the first time. I'm 7 years on now, and it still feels scary to say, because as I've spoken about before, you're at the mercy of what their understanding of what you're telling them is. But
Well,
what's changed for me in those 7 years is if they don't understand it, I'm not as shaken by it. If they suddenly start speaking to me differently or dismiss me a bit more, I kind of think, well, that's on you, buddy. It's not so much my problem, because now I'm like, oh, okay, they don't get it and they think this. Isn't that typical? And I write it off. Whereas at the start, that really shook me. And it's still a bit unsettling, but I can handle it because I know me, that person not understanding doesn't mean I'm not okay. I don't know if that makes sense.
well,
So,
yeah. And then actually,
um,
not only have you gone from thinking, perhaps I won't say, you're doing a podcast about it. That's one of the
yes,
drivers of the podcast, isn't it? Massive
yeah,
leap to actually, you know what, we want to share it and talk
yeah,
about it. And it is absolutely deeply personal. It's about identity, isn't it? But sometimes it's
big
about
time.
practical things as well, and changing the way you do things to make yourself feel better. And I think one of the things you just alluded to is about that energy accounting and thinking,
Mm,
I don't have to make myself do this. It's okay to say no. Because if your phone
yeah,
was on 1%, you wouldn't shout at it, would you? You'd plug it in and put it on charge for a bit. And then you'd maybe
yeah,
expect it to do some of its apps. And you might still think, well, I better not watch a video. It's only on 10. We can do that for ourselves, can't we? And learn to say no, thank you.
hmm,
And I think that's one of the things about being an adult is you've got that flexibility to do that much more than when
mm.
you're a child. But going from not knowing to doing hosting a podcast about it is a huge journey that you've been on.
It's still scary.
Yeah.
And I'll have the thought a couple of times a week, what the hell are you doing? Um, you didn't want anyone to know, and now people you don't know can know. That hopefully just gets across to people how desperate I am for things to be different, because I'm totally willing to have this conversation for people to know it about me, if it means that people can understand this part of autism and ADHD better, and if it helps anybody um, going through these things, and to support other people like me, so that it's not able to be written off as a minority and the few, because everything else we're going to be speaking about in following episodes is how much this is not a minority issue. So to me, it's worth it, and I wouldn't not do it, because it's got to be for something as well. I think I want it to be for something, because I can just see and feel it in the world, how much learning there is for everybody to do and how different things need to be still. I really, really want to help people, and I found the right people to do it with as well. I know what you're all seeing too, which makes me feel stronger and more validated to come on and speak about these things, because it's not just me. My experience is something you two see a lot, and that gives me the support I need to go, no, this does need addressing, so let's do that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose everyone has such a different journey towards being diagnosed or being seen or identified, however you want to look at it. And, some people are striving for years to find someone to assess them. Some people, like yourself, are a bit more surprised by it and hadn't really been searching for that, and then get hit like a brick, right, with this sudden knowledge. So it's different for everybody. Some people are brought
Yeah.
along by the parents or a partner. Some people have been doing it on their own and seeking it out on their own. I think some of the themes that we've talked about today are pretty common in all of those different situations, however you come for assessment, and some of the themes post-diagnostically also. But everyone's different, and everyone's jigsaw will look different. I think there are some key themes in there, and for sure one of them is about shame, and I think the word diagnosis has to go because that fits into that concept of shame and something wrong, and there isn't. It's just different, isn't it? I think that's one of the main things we're trying to get across.
That is all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you come back next time. Please follow or subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. And if you'd like even more of us, you can go over to www.maskingforit.com and find more episodes and blogs on our website, which get into some nitty-gritty detail because we do love that. And you can also get in touch with us if there's something that we haven't covered, or you have any questions or something about your experience that you'd like to share. Then please send that to us via email. Is contact@maskingforit.com, or any of our socials, which are @maskingforitpodcast. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for being here as we bring the conversation out to the real big world to see if we can change it just that little bit. Thank you so much for being a part of it, and we'll see you next time.